The scraggly bulldog puppy lying in the ditch looked straight into my eyes and answered my question. Not with a bark, not with a whine, with two distinct grunts that sounded impossible, deliberate, and intentional. Behind me, for combat-hardened soldiers went dead silent. One of them whispered, "Did that dog just talk?" I didn't have an answer. But over the next 8 months, Rocky would prove again and again that some bonds don't follow the rules we think we know. And the day his talking shifted from playful responses to frantic warnings, warnings that would eventually save every life in our unit, I realized we hadn't rescued him at all. He'd been preparing to rescue us. If you've ever felt like an animal understood you in ways people never could, stay with me. This is our story, and it starts in the worst place imaginable. The sun was bleeding out over the perimeter fence when our convoy rolled back in. 4 of us in the truck, bodies running on caffeine and muscle memory. Mine stuck somewhere between home and the last ambush. The engine ticked as it cooled. That heavy post-mission silence settled in. The kind where nobody asks how you're doing because nobody wants to answer. That's when I heard it. A broken little whimper, thin and raspy, cutting through the gravel crunch of our boots. Not the sharp, alert bark you expect on a base. This sounded tired, like something small had been calling for a long time and was almost out of hope. Marcus lifted a hand. "You hear that?" We all froze. Another whimper, then a low, shuddering groan, like the end of a word that never quite formed. My eyes tracked the sound to a narrow drainage ditch running along the fence line. Shadows pooled there, thick with the smell of stagnant water and rust. I hopped down, boots sliding in loose rock. "Mercer, man, we just got back," someone muttered behind me. "Leave the squirrels alone." But it wasn't a squirrel. 2 glassy eyes stared up at me from the mud, catching the last streak of orange light. A tiny bulldog puppy lay half-curled in the ditch, ribs sharp under patchy black and tan fur, paws caked with dry blood. He smelled like fear, like damp concrete, like something that had been surviving on nothing but hope. The second he saw my face, his ears twitched forward. His tail gave one slow, uncertain wag. Then he made that sound again. It wasn't a bark or a whine. It was a rough, gravelly grumble that rolled up from his chest and broke off right at the moment you'd expect a word. I crouched down. Rocky let out a sound I'd never heard before, a grumble that almost sounded like, "Finally." For a second, my breath just stopped. Gravel crunched under Marcus's boots behind me. The puppy's chest rose and fell in shallow, broken rhythms. Somewhere across the base, a truck horn blared, but all I could hear was that impossible sound still echoing in my skull. Marcus leaned over my shoulder, voice coming out flat like his brain was still processing. "Dude, that dog just said something." The others laughed, the nervous kind that comes when your brain can't follow what you just heard. One of the guys squinted down. "He's done for. We gotta call it in." The puppy tried to stand, legs shaking. He slipped in the mud, then dragged himself the last inch toward my hand, nose twitching at my sleeve. His breath was warm and sour against my fingers. He gave another half-grumble, half-sigh, and pressed his whole weight into my palm like that was the safest place on earth. My brain did the math, protocols, regulations, the hassle of paperwork. We weren't a K-9 unit. We weren't supposed to pick strays off the fence line. My heart answered first. He chose us, I said, hearing my own voice like it belonged to someone else. "I'm not leaving him here." Marcus shook his head but smiled. "Of course you're not." We wrapped him in an old field jacket and carried him back toward the truck. His body was lighter than it should have been, all bones and tremors. Every bump in the dirt road made him grunt softly, those little broken sounds that felt way too intentional. Back in the barracks, the air smelled like sweat, cheap detergent, and instant coffee burning on a hot plate. I cleared a spot by my bed, laid him on a folded blanket, and set a dented metal water bowl next to his nose. He licked once, twice, then turned his head toward me, eyes tracking every move like I was the only anchor he had left. "Hey, buddy," I said quietly, dropping to the floor beside him. "You're safe now. I've got you." He answered with a faint grumble. One paw twitched across the blanket until it bumped my wrist. His tail made that single, hesitant wag again, like he wanted to trust it, but wasn't sure yet this was real. The guys came by one at a time, pretending they needed something from my locker, pretending they weren't worried. "Dog's not going to make it," one muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. But Rocky didn't know that script. He just kept watching my face, like he was waiting to see if I believed he'd stay. That night, I didn't sleep in my bunk. I stretched out on the floor beside him, one hand resting lightly on his side, so I could feel every rise and fall of his ribs. His breathing stayed shallow and uneven. Each exhale ended in that low, scratchy half-word. Every time his chest went still for half a second too long, my heart stopped with it. Would this be the breath he didn't come back from? I checked him once an hour, then once every 15 minutes. My eyes burned, but I couldn't close them. The thought of waking up and finding that little body cold under my fingers. I'd seen too much of that already. Around 3 in the morning, something changed. He shifted closer, nose nudging under my palm, pressing his whole weight into it. A soft, steady rumble vibrated out of his chest, more like a tiny engine than a cry. It wasn't fear. It sounded like relief. My last thought before sleep finally dragged me under was simple and irrational and absolutely true. Please let this be the one who stays. And somewhere in the dark, with the hum of the bass outside and the quiet rasp of his breathing, I swear I heard him answer with that same strange, broken little grumble. If you've ever prayed for something fragile to just hold on one more night, you already know this feeling. Stay with me. And if you want to see where this impossible bond leads, tap subscribe so you don't miss what Rocky does next. Morning on base always smells the same: burnt coffee, dust, motor oil. That day it smelled like all of that plus wet dog and antiseptic. I blinked awake to find a pair of round brown eyes already inches from my face. The bulldog was upright. Wobbly but upright. He'd dragged himself half off the blanket sometime before dawn and was now planted in front of me like a tiny, stubborn guard. "You're alive," I croaked. His ears lifted. He snorted once, then gave me that same scratchy chest grumble. This time, it landed right on top of my words, like a clumsy attempt at answering. I pushed myself up onto my elbows. "You hungry, buddy?" He cocked his head to the side, one ear flopping. Then, clear as a signal, he grunted twice. Short, sharp, almost rhythmic. I froze. He stared. His tail gave 2 quick wags, perfectly synced with the sounds. Behind me, the door banged open. Marcus stepped in with a mug of something that might have been coffee in a kinder universe. "Morning, sunshine," he started, then stopped. "Whoa, he's up." I glanced from the pup to Marcus. "Ask him if he's hungry." Marcus raised an eyebrow, but played along. "You hungry, little dude?" The dog turned his head toward Marcus, then back to me, like he was checking with his handler before answering. Then he did it again. 2 grunts, 2 wags. Marcus's mug tilted in his hand. Hot coffee sloshed over the rim onto the concrete floor. He blinked hard, then set the mug down carefully. "Ask him something else." My brain scrambled for a question. "You want water?" The pup sniffed at the empty metal bowl, then shot me a look that could only be described as offended. One long, dramatic groan dragged out of his chest, tapering toward what felt suspiciously like the end of a word. Marcus backed up a step, hands raised like he was surrendering to something he couldn't process. The room held its breath with us. 3 soldiers and 1 half-star bulldog, suspended in that insane little moment where everybody silently asked the same question. For the next hour, we tested him. "Do you want food?" 2 grunts. "Do you want to go outside?" 2 grunts and a paw shuffle toward the door. "You want to clean the latrines for us?" 1 unimpressed, drawn-out groan, followed by a squint that looked way too much like judgment. The room erupted. Guys doubled over laughing. Someone slapped the wall. Rocky just sat there, unbothered, like he'd been roasting us his whole life. By breakfast, word had leaked out. Guys from neighboring rooms drifted in, leaning on bunks and door frames, pretending they weren't fascinated. We didn't have much entertainment out there. A talking dog beat reruns on the rec room TV any day. Someone asked, "What's his name?" I looked down at the pup chewing on the edge of my bootlace. He met my gaze, head tilted, tongue lolling slightly to the side. "Rocky," I said, because when we found him, he'd hit rock bottom. Rocky made a low, pleased rumble and bumped his head against my shin like he approved. Later, when the others filtered out to their tasks, the room finally quieted down. The adrenaline faded. The leftover weight of the night pressed in. I sat on the edge of the bunk, elbows on my knees, helmet at my feet. Rocky watched me. Not just looked, watched. eyes tracking every slow movement, reading the soft collapse in my shoulders the way only something that's already known fear can recognize it. "You ever get tired of being scared?" I asked him softly. The words slipped out before I could stop them. He blinked. One paw crept forward until it rested on my boot. He let out a low, steady groan. Not distressed, not playful, something in between. He smelled like damp blanket, cheap kibble from a mess, and that warm, doggy comfort that somehow cuts through the chemical sting of cleaning supplies. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Me too." That was the first time I talked to him about the nightmares. Not the full details, just the edges. How the sounds came back at night. How I'd wake up convinced I was still pinned down behind that burned-out vehicle, lungs full of dust and metal. He listened. Every time my voice broke or faded, his ears twitched, and he'd make this soft, almost reassuring grunt, like he was nudging the story back on track. Was I projecting? Probably. But in a place where days blurred together and the world outside the fence felt imaginary, that little bulldog became the one presence that felt undeniably real. By the end of the week, patterns emerged. 2 grunts for yes. 1 curt grunt for no. A long, warbled groan when he wasn't sure or didn't like the options. We tried to catch him off guard, but Rocky stayed consistent. "You want to do my paperwork?" Groan. "You want to ride up front with me?" 2 rapid grunts. Tail hammering the floor. Paws scrambling toward the door. Marcus started filming on his phone, half joking and half serious. The videos went up online. Bulldog talks back to his handler. Within days, the comments section exploded. Skeptics called it fake. Believers swore they could hear syllables. Trainers debated whether conditioning could produce that level of response. But we weren't claiming miracles. We were just filming what happened every single day. And every night, Rocky curled up on the narrow strip of mattress between my legs and the wall, back pressed against my thigh, nose tucked under my arm. As the barracks settled into its usual nighttime symphony, snoring, distant generators, someone's quiet music leaking through cheap headphones, I stared at the ceiling and listened to Rocky breathe. In the dark, the question gnawed at me. Was I just a tired soldier hearing patterns and noise, or had I stumbled into the kind of connection people spend their whole lives chasing? Before sleep pulled me under, I felt a small, heavy head nudge against my ribs. A soft, questioning grunt rose up from the shadows. "You're staying," I murmured. "I don't know how yet, but you're staying." He gave me 2 faint grunts in reply, and somehow, that felt like a promise. 3 weeks into Rocky's time with us, the first rail warning came. I was logging inventory in the supply depot, rows of metal shelving, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of cardboard and machine grease thick in the air. Rocky sat near the door, chin resting on his paws, eyes half closed. Then, without warning, his head snapped up, his ears pinned flat against his skull. Body went rigid, hackles prickling along his spine. He let out 3 short, urgent barks, razor-sharp and identical in rhythm. Pause. 2 longer barks, lower in pitch. I froze, pen still hovering over the checklist. "Rocky, what's wrong?" He didn't look at me. His eyes locked on the far corner of the depot, near the electrical panel. 3 short barks again. Too long. My stomach dropped hard. "Marcus," I shouted toward the open door. "Get out here." Marcus jogged over, boots echoing on concrete. "What's up?" "Listen." Rocky repeated the pattern. 3 short. Too long. Marcus went pale. "That's Morse code. That's SOS." 30 seconds later, the fire alarm screamed to life. Smoke poured from the electrical panel in thin, acrid streams. We evacuated the building in under 2 minutes. Fire suppression kicked in. No injuries. Minimal damage. But as we stood outside watching the smoke clear, every soldier in the area turned to stare at the little bulldog sitting calmly at my feet, tail wagging like he'd just done the most normal thing in the world. Marcus crouched down, hands on his knees, breathing hard. His voice came out thin. "Jake, how did he know?" I didn't have an answer. After that, we started paying attention, not just to Rocky's talking, to his behavior. 2 days later, during a routine perimeter inspection, Rocky stopped dead in his tracks 50 yards from the vehicle bay. His nose lifted, nostrils flaring. He whined once, high-pitched, insistent, then pawed at my boot 3 times in rapid succession. I radioed ahead. "Hold inspection." Possible issue with Vehicle 12. The motor pool sergeant found a fuel line leaked 10 minutes later. One spark away from catastrophe. The week after that, Rocky refused to let anyone enter the East Barracks until maintenance checked the HVAC system. Carbon monoxide buildup. Silent, invisible, deadly. Rocky had smelled it before the detectors even registered a warning. The unit stopped laughing. Stopped calling it coincidence. Started watching Rocky the way you watch a smoke alarm in a house that's already burned you once. I documented everything in a notebook I kept on my bunk. Dates, times, behaviors, warning patterns. One night, I showed the logs to our commanding officer during his rounds. He flipped through the pages in silence, jaw working like he was chewing over something he didn't want to swallow. Finally, he looked up. "Mercer, I've been in service 22 years. I've seen working dogs, bomb detection, search and rescue. But this..." He shook his head slowly. "Your dog isn't just reacting to stimuli. He's anticipating. Keep logging. And Mercer, sir, don't let him out of your sight." By the end of the month, Rocky had become an unofficial early warning system for the entire base. Guys would check with me before running drills. Rocky acting weird today. If he was calm, they proceeded. If his ears were back, his nose twitching in that specific way, they double-checked everything. It saved time, equipment, and twice it saved lives. But the weight of it pressed down on me in the quiet hours. Because every time Rocky's body went rigid, every time that low warning growl rumbled up from his chest, I had to make a call. Trust him, and risk looking paranoid if nothing happened. Ignore him, and risk everything if he was right. Rocky smelled different on warning days. Sharper, his fur carrying the faint metallic tang of adrenaline. I started talking to him more at night, when the barracks finally quieted down. "You know something's coming, don't you?" I whispered one night, fingers tracing the ridge of his spine. He didn't grunt or answer, just pressed his head harder against my ribs and exhaled slow and heavy, like he was carrying weight I couldn't see. And in the darkness, I realized something that made my throat tighten. Rocky wasn't just warning us about fires and fuel leaks. He was preparing us for something bigger, something none of us were ready to face yet. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Standard issue. My name typed across the front in sterile, impersonal font. I knew what it was before I even opened it. Deployment orders. Second rotation. 8 months. K9 transfers not authorized. The words blurred together as I read them once, twice, trying to find a loophole that wasn't there. I folded the paper carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and sat on my bunk. Across the room, Rocky's ears twitched. I didn't say anything out loud. Didn't need to. Rocky stood, crossed the small space between us, and sniffed the envelope. His body went still. Tail dropped. Then he looked up at me with those round, unblinking eyes, and let out a sound I'd never heard before. A low, mournful howl that started deep in his chest and climbed until it rattled the walls. The moment I read the deployment orders, Rocky let out a howl that made every soldier in the barracks freeze. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Boots paused in doorways. Someone dropped something metal that clattered and rolled across the floor. Marcus appeared in the doorway, eyes wide. What happened? I couldn't speak, just held up the envelope. He took one look at my face and understood. "Oh man. Jake, I'm sorry." Rocky howled again, pressing his entire body against my legs like he could physically anchor me to this spot, to this moment, to him. I tried to keep it together. Went through the motions, attended briefings, ran drills, pretended everything was fine. But Rocky knew better. His vocalizations changed overnight. No more playful grunts or yes and no games. Now, every sound was a question. A whine when I packed gear. A sharp bark when I pulled my duffel from the closet. A low, anxious groan every time I checked my phone. He stopped eating. 2 days. Then 3. I sat on the floor beside his untouched bowl, chest cracking with every shallow breath he took. "Rocky, buddy, you gotta eat." He turned his head away. "Please." Nothing. He smelled thinner, fur losing its warmth, the healthy dog scent fading into something brittle and wrong. Marcus crouched beside me. "We gotta do something, man. He's gonna make himself sick." "I know. So what are you gonna do?" I stared at the duffel bag in the corner, the envelope on my bunk, the bulldog who'd pulled me out of the dark and was now slipping into it himself. "I don't know," I admitted, and the truth of it felt like drowning. I started making calls. Adoption paperwork. Foster networks. Military K-9 transfer requests I already knew would be denied. Every door closed before I even finished knocking. Marcus offered to take him temporarily. Just while you're gone. I'll keep him safe. I asked Rocky, "You want to stay with Marcus for a while?" Rocky didn't grunt or move. Just stared at me with those heartbreak eyes and pressed his nose into my palm. That was his answer. That night, Rocky started sleeping on my duffel bag. Not beside it, on it. Anytime I reached for it, he'd growl, low, protective, desperate. If I tried to move him, he'd plant his paws and refuse to budge, every muscle locked in defiance. Marcus watched from his bunk. "He's not going to let you go. I don't have a choice. Don't you?" I looked at him. Marcus sat up, elbows on his knees. "You've been different since Rocky showed up. Less haunted. And now you're going to walk away from the thing that pulled you back. It's not that simple, isn't it?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy and unanswerable. On day 6, I took Rocky for a long walk along the perimeter fence. The sun bled orange across the horizon. Dust kicked up with every step. Rocky walked close, shoulder pressed against my leg, silent for the first time since the orders arrived. I stopped near the place where I found him 2 months ago. The ditch was still there, empty now, just dirt and shadows. I stared at that hollow space and realized, if I'd followed regulations that night, Rocky would have died here alone. And I'd have lost the one thing that made me feel human again. So screw regulations. I wasn't going to lose him twice. "I don't know how to do this," I said quietly. "But I'm not giving up on you." Rocky sat, leaned his full weight against my shin. Didn't grunt or whine. Just stayed. What would you do in Jake's situation? Drop your thoughts below and stay tuned, because what happens next changes everything. By day 7, Rocky still hadn't eaten a full meal. The base vet examined him in the small clinic that smelled like antiseptic and fear. Rocky sat perfectly still on the metal table, eyes locked on mine the entire time, ignoring the stethoscope and the thermometer and the hands prodding his ribs. The vet, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and no-nonsense hands, stepped back and pulled off her gloves. "Physically, he's declining, but there's nothing medically wrong with him." Then why? Separation anxiety. He's grieving something that hasn't even happened yet. The words hit like a gut punch. "Can you fix it?" She looked at me for a long moment. "Not with medicine. The only thing that's going to help him is you." I stopped sleeping, spent hours staring at the ceiling, running scenarios that all ended the same way. Option 1, follow orders, leave Rocky behind, risk his health, maybe his life. Option 2, refuse deployment, face consequences, lose my career, possibly my benefits, maybe my future. Both felt like losing. Rocky stayed glued to my side, a shadow that barely made a sound anymore. The other guys tried to help, sneaking him treats, talking to him, playing with him, but he just stared past them, waiting for me to reappear. Rocky refused to eat for 3 days, and when he finally vocalized again, it sounded heartbreakingly like a human cry. Marcus caught me one night, sitting on the floor of the empty rec room, head in my hands. "You look like hell, man. Feel worse." He sat down beside me, back against the wall. "You know what the messed up part is? You saved him. Pulled him out of that ditch when everyone said to leave him. And now the same system that put you in a position to save him is the one tearing you apart for caring too much." I exhaled slow. "What am I supposed to do, Marcus?" "I don't know, but I know some people who might." The next morning, Marcus came back with news. I posted about Rocky's situation on the video threads, the ones that went viral. And people are pissed, Jake." He turned the screen toward me. Comments flooded in by the hundreds. "This is heartbreaking. Someone help this soldier and his dog. Start a fundraiser. I'll donate. There has to be a way." Within 48 hours, a small army of strangers had organized. Lawyers offering pro bono consultations. Veterans advocacy groups reaching out with resources. Someone even contacted a senator's office about emotional support animal provisions for active duty personnel. For the first time in 2 weeks, I felt something other than dread. Hope. Fragile, uncertain, but real. Marcus found the loophole 3 days before my deployment date. Emotional support, animal certification. If Rocky qualified, and if I could provide documentation of mental health need, and if command approved the exception, he could deploy with me as a registered ESA. The paperwork was brutal psychological evaluations, medical history, written testimony from my CO. But there was one problem. My CO had to sign off personally. And when I walked into his office 2 days later, he didn't look up from his desk. "Mercer, I heard about your situation. Sir, I'm requesting approval for. I know what you're requesting." He finally looked up, and I'm denying it. My chest went cold. "Sir, with respect, this sets a bad precedent. Specialist. We start making exceptions for pets. Where does it end? Every soldier with an emotional support hamster. Rocky isn't a pet, sir. He saved lives on this base. The fire, the fuel leak, the carbon monoxide. I read your logs." He tapped the folder on his desk. "And I believe your dog has unusual instincts. But deploying him opens us up to liability, logistics issues, and questions from higher command I don't want to answer." I stood there, fists clenched at my sides, searching for words that wouldn't get me court-martialed. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" He sighed. "Go ahead." Rocky pulled me out of the worst place I've been since I came back from my first rotation. He's the reason I sleep at night. The reason I don't wake up thinking I'm still in that vehicle. And if you take that away from me, I don't know what happens. But I know it won't be good. The CO was quiet for a long time. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. "There's a behavioral evaluator coming through in 2 days. Contractor. Worked with military dogs for 20 years. If Rocky passes every single test she puts him through, and I mean flawlessly, I'll consider it." "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet, Mercer. If he fails, this conversation never happened." The behavioral evaluation took place in a training yard that smelled like diesel and hot sand. The evaluator, a grizzled woman named Kowalski who looked like she'd seen every kind of dog and wasn't impressed by any of them, put Rocky through hell. Noise tests with recorded gunfire, crowd simulations, stress responses under controlled chaos, commands in chaotic environments. Rocky stayed calm through all of it. Follow my signals. Adjusted his position when I shifted mine. But there was one final test. Kowalski set up a scenario designed to break even trained K9s. A simulated IED discovery with smoke, noise, and deliberate distractions. If he panics, bolts, or fails to respond to your commands, he fails, she said flatly. I looked down at Rocky. He looked back, ears forward, waiting. "Ready, buddy." 2 grunts. The test began. Smoke flooded the area. Speakers blasted engine noise and shouting. Kowalski's assistants moved unpredictably, trying to distract him. Rocky stayed locked on me. When I stopped, he stopped. When I signaled left, he moved left. When I gave the alert command, he sat perfectly still, eyes never leaving mine. When it was over, Kowalski pulled off her cap and scratched her head. "Mercer, I've seen trained K9s crack under less pressure than that." She looked at Rocky, who was now sitting at perfect attention, tail wagging slowly. "Your dog isn't just smart. He's mission aware. And that bond." She glanced at me. "That's not something you can fake." She turned to my CO, who'd been observing from the sidelines. "He passes. And frankly, sir, you'd be making a mistake not approving this." My CO was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once. "Conditional approval. He causes any problems during deployment. You both come home early." "Understood." "Yes, sir." That night, I dropped to my knees in front of Rocky, hands shaking as I pulled him close. "You're coming with me, buddy. You're coming with me." He grunted twice, clear, strong, unmistakable. "Yes, yes." For the first time in 2 weeks, Rocky ate a full meal. And that night, when he curled up against me on the narrow bunk, his breathing came steady and deep. No whimpers, no anxious shifts. Just peace. If this story is hitting you in the feels, smash that like button and subscribe. You won't believe how this ends. The transport plane smelled like fuel, sweat, and stale air. Rows of soldiers strapped into jump seats, gear piled at their feet, engines roaring so loud you had to shout to be heard. Rocky wore his official ESA vest, black nylon with reflective patches that read, "Emotional support animal. Do not pet." He sat between my boots, body pressed against my shins, eyes scanning the cabin with alert, cautious focus. The flight was supposed to be routine, 6 hours, 1 refuel stop, touchdown at the forward operating base by nightfall. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. Rocky adjusted to the noise, the vibration, the claustrophobic hum of the cabin. A few soldiers leaned over to check on him. He responded with his usual two-grunt greeting. Then, 20 minutes into the second hour, something changed. Rocky's body went rigid. His nose lifted, nostrils flaring in sharp, repetitive inhales. I felt it through my boots, the shift from calm to alert. Rocky, he ignored me. His ears pinned flat. Hackles rose along his spine. Then he started barking, sharp, urgent, insistent barks that cut through the engine noise like a siren. 20 minutes into the flight, Rocky started his warning bark, and the pilot announced emergency descent. Soldiers around me sat up, eyes wide. Mercer, what's wrong with your dog? I don't know. Something's wrong. Check the systems. A crew member pushed through the aisle, face tight with irritation. Specialist, you need to control your... The plane shuddered hard. Emergency lights flashed red along the ceiling. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, clipped and controlled. We have a mechanical failure in the starboard engine. Initiating emergency descent. Brace for turbulence. The cabin erupted into controlled chaos. Soldiers checking gear, medics prepping equipment, everyone strapping in tighter. Rocky stopped barking. He turned, looked up at me with those wide, dark eyes, and let out one soft grunt. I told you. I dropped my hand onto his head, fingers trembling. Good boy, Rocky. Good boy. The emergency landing was rough but controlled. We touched down at a secondary airfield. Fire trucks already rolling, crew scrambling to assess damage. The starboard engine had been minutes from catastrophic failure. If it had gone out mid-flight, over open water, with no backup landing site. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone knew. As we filed off the plane onto the tarmac, soldiers kept glancing back at Rocky like they were seeing him for the first time. The pilot, a stone-faced woman with 20 years of flight experience, approached me as I stepped down the ramp. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at Rocky, then at me. That dog saved 70 lives today. Specialist. I don't care what anyone says. He stays. By the time we reached the forward operating base, word had already spread. The dog who talked. The dog who'd warned about fires, leaks, and carbon monoxide. The dog who just predicted a catastrophic engine failure mid-flight. Rocky wasn't a mascot anymore. He was a legend. But for me, he was still just a scraggly puppy I'd pulled from a ditch. The one who'd chosen me when I needed choosing most. The base was smaller, rougher, hotter than the last one. Dust everywhere. Tents instead of barracks. The constant hum of generators and distant patrols. Rocky adapted within hours, learning the layout, memorizing the sounds, starting to talk to soldiers who wandered over to meet the famous warning dog. But more than that, he became something the base didn't know it needed. Guys would sit with him after rough patrols, talking quietly while he listened with those patient, knowing eyes. He'd grunt responses that somehow felt like understanding, like I know I've been scared too. One night, Marcus sat beside me outside our tent, watching Rocky sprawl in the dirt, belly up under the stars. You know what the crazy part is? Marcus said, "What? You thought you rescued him. But I think he's been rescuing all of us this whole time." But the biggest rescue was still coming, and it would happen in 12 seconds that changed everything. It happened on a Wednesday, 3 weeks into deployment. Routine patrol, standard perimeter sweep. Nothing unusual flagged on the briefing. Rocky walked beside me, vest catching the harsh midday sun, nose working overtime in the dry heat. We were approaching the northeast fence line, 10 yards out, about to do our standard visual check, when Rocky stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. His entire body locked up. Legs stiff, ears flat, eyes fixed on a section of fence that looked exactly like every other section. Then he started barking. Frantic, desperate barking that bypassed my brain and hit my spine. Rocky, what? He lunged forward, teeth catching my sleeve, pulling me backward with everything he had. Fall back. I screamed at the unit. Everyone fall back now. Soldiers froze for half a heartbeat, training warring with confusion. But Marcus didn't hesitate. Move, he roared, already running. We scattered, boots pounding dirt, gear rattling, Rocky still barking, still pulling, still insisting. We sprinted 30 yards to the nearest berm and dove behind it. 12 seconds later, the explosion tore through the fence line exactly where we'd been standing. Heat slammed into our backs. Dust choked the air. The shockwave rattled my teeth. When the ringing in my ears finally faded, I lifted my head. The section of fence where we'd been standing was gone. Just a crater, smoke, and debris scattered across scorched earth. Rocky's frantic barking gave us 12 seconds. Just enough time to get everyone to cover before the blast. 0 casualties. Not one. Because a bulldog who'd learned to talk had screamed a warning none of us could ignore. The debriefing was short. IED, buried shallow, trigger wire invisible under dust. The bomb tech who swept the area afterward pulled me aside, face pale. Specialist, there's no way your dog saw that device. Which means he smelled it, or sensed the disruption in the ground, or, hell, I don't even know. He glanced at Rocky, who was lying calmly in the shade, panting softly. But whatever he did, that's not training. That's instinct. That's a bond. That night, Command officially recognized Rocky as a unit asset. Not just an ESA, a lifesaver. They didn't give him a medal. Dogs don't get those. But they gave him something better. Respect, the kind that comes when 50 soldiers owe their lives to 4 legs, a wet nose, and a bond nobody thought was possible. 4 months later, Marcus and I sat in the comm tent, waiting for the satellite link to connect. The screen flickered. Then there he was, Marcus, grinning from his bunk back home. Discharge papers finally processed. Yo, Jake, let me see him. I angled the laptop down. Rocky's ears perked at the sound of Marcus's voice. He tilted his head. Then, clear as day, he grunted twice. Yes, I remember you. Marcus laughed, the sound crackling through the connection. Man, I miss you guys. Both of you. Rocky leaned into the screen, nose almost touching the camera, and let out a soft, rumbling groan. Marcus's eyes went bright. Yeah, buddy, I miss you too. After the call ended, I sat outside under the vast, star-scattered sky. Rocky sprawled beside me, head resting on my thigh, breathing slow and steady. I thought about the ditch. The first night, I thought I'd lose him. The deployment orders, the plane, the blast. I ran my hand along Rocky's spine, feeling the rise and fall of his ribs, the warmth of his fur, the absolute certainty of his presence. You know what's crazy? I murmured. Rocky's ear twitched. I thought I saved you that day. He grunted once, soft, contemplative. But you've been saving me every single day since. He shifted closer, pressing his full weight against me like an anchor I didn't know I needed. And in that moment, with the hum of the bass around us and the stars burning cold overhead, I understood something I'd been too scared to admit. Some bonds can't be explained, can't be trained, can't be replicated. They can only be felt, trusted, and followed, even when the world says it's impossible. Rocky let out 2 soft grunts. Yes, always yes. And I believed him. Rocky's story proves animals are more than pets. They're family, heroes, lifelines. If this moved you, share it with someone who needs to feel this bond. And check out our next video for more incredible dog rescue stories that'll restore your faith and loyalty.